This is the Monday Call, brought to you by NZ Funds. We hear about the disastrous effects of climate change every day, and most of us accept that the main cause of global warming is a rise in carbon in the atmosphere. Worldwide, the construction and operation of buildings accounted for 39% of emissions in 2017. And in New Zealand, the built environment is responsible for 20% of the country's carbon footprint. But there's some good news, should we decide to act on it. We're joined by Andrew Eagles, CEO of the New Zealand Green Building Council, and Nick Robertson, Senior Consultant at Burl, whose recent research shows that New Zealand could receive a multi-billion-dollar economic boost if new homes and buildings are built greener starting from 2025. Kiwis still invest more into property than anything else. But are we prepared to invest in low-emission building practices that will benefit us personally and the country as a whole?
Nick, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. It's really great to have you here. I might start with you, Andrew. It would be really fantastic if you could give us a little bit of background as to your role, how you find yourself in it, and what it is about sort of your job that excites you. And then after that, we'll jump across to you, Nick, and hear a little about you, and then we'll launch into the meat and the potatoes of today's discussion.
Brilliant. Well, Morena, it's great to talk today. Thanks so much for the opportunity to come on and speak with you and just explore this a little further. So I trained as an economist and also looked at public policy, both at Otago University and then on to Victoria University of Wellington. And then I became an official at Ministry of Health. And what I became really interested in is how we can make better policy decisions that deliver for our citizens, that are more efficient and also better for the environment. I went on to work as an official in a number of different roles in London, partly for the Homes and Communities Agency there. And then I started taking an interest in how we can build and manage our homes and buildings better for lower carbon, lower running costs. And there's a great opportunity that can deliver for whānau, for families, but also for businesses if they have lower running costs with their buildings. And so I worked in a number of different roles in London, and then the New Zealand Green Building Council got in touch to say they were doing some exciting work in what I consider coming back home. And I was really excited to think that I could help deliver better places, healthier structures and homes for our buildings and our people. And that's what really drives me. And so I've been doing that role at the Green Building Council with some great architects, engineers, but also some advocates pushing for change to deliver lower carbon, healthier places. So it's great to talk through some of that and the tremendous work that Nick's done with the report.
Fantastic. And I guess that's quite a shift then from economics to building, but no doubt there's some sort of parallels you can kind of draw on in the way it all fits together. Nick, Burl, how did you find yourself there, and would you mind describing your role as it stands?
Yeah, so I've been at Burl coming on 4 years now. So my role sort of started off I guess studying law and economics at Waikato University before sort of starting at the Office of the Auditor General as an assistant performance auditor. So that sort of threw me right in the deep end of central government, and then shifted across to Parliament and worked as an economics researcher in the parliamentary research team there. So that was working across sort of all the spectrums. So would often get calls from both sides of the political aisle to do research for them. So I got a really good view of sort of both sides of the argument there. Then I went off on my OE to London, where I worked in a local authority for 2 years and then spent 2 years consulting for Grant Thornton over there, which sort of gave me a really good insight into sort of the different challenges that, particularly in the UK, working across sort of quite diverse range of councils and facing very different challenges. And then I came back to New Zealand and spent a year at the Ministry of Transport, where Aucklanders will hate me because I was part of the team that introduced the Auckland Regional Fuel Tax. and then also worked on increases to RUC and Fed rates. And then sort of from there moved on to Burl, sort of enjoy the sort of variety of work that we do at Burl. So one day I might be doing an economic impact of a port. Another day I might be working on an economic strategy for a local authority, which is sort of why I'm in Tokoroa at the moment. And then, so yeah, just it varies every day. Sort of you become an expert in a topic for a really short period of time, and then move on to the next one. And then, you know, eventually something will come back around and you pick it up again and all that knowledge will come flooding back in a hurry.
Fantastic. Well, you're an expert today on housing. So let's talk a little about, you know, property is, unfortunately, New Zealand's favourite asset class, has been for many, many decades. How would you describe the construction industry today?
Well, I mean, the construction industry is one of New Zealand's largest sectors, employing hundreds of thousands of people, and it goes through ebbs and flows in terms of strength of uptake. You look at the consenting numbers, we've moved from in the teens up to over 50,000, so you see a real ebbs and flows. I think that it's a coming together of many elements. There's so many elements which impact construction, availability of land, use of technology such as BIM and online systems to speed up construction. And there's tremendous opportunity to streamline and improve with offsite manufacture, with technology to speed that up. I think that we're doing a good job to help beat back the housing crisis that has been created by constructing more homes at the moment. But we also have a more complex challenge in New Zealand with earthquake in our buildings sector as opposed to homes so much, where we need to, say, for instance, replace existing buildings in the Wellington region, you know, strengthen those. So those are some of the challenges and opportunities for the construction sector.
Righto. And obviously it's changing very quickly as, I guess, cycles flow through. Where do you think we are today in the cycle? And starts are still high, but obviously interest rates are going up. How do you think that's all going to come together? And Nick, maybe this is probably in your zone. Where is it heading?
Yeah, I think we're likely to see, interest rates are increasing, cost of living's going up. I think we're going to see consents starting to fall. I just think there's going to be sort of reduced demand for a little while as we go through a tougher economic period that might just slow down people's willingness to spend on housing. Though, you know, as Andrew mentioned, we have got that shortage, so there's a little bit of balancing out there to do. I think at the moment, you know, a lot is dictated by house prices, and with so many people expecting them to fall, that's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. You get a lot of people kind of sitting, waiting for it to fall, not willing to offer those prices. So I think there's sort of a little bit of a holding pattern while we sort of figure out what the future is going to look like. So Reserve Bank's got their warnings out there. We've got to reach that peak of the OCR and the peak of interest rates and then see what happens to inflation. And when the economy starts to pick up, I think we'll start to see housing pick up again from what had been sort of record consenting levels.
Yeah. But, and you know, the imbalance will persist though, won't it? So yeah. even with consents high, there's a long way to go.
Yeah, and we've got to catch up. For so long we've underinvested in our property and our housing, so there is that need to catch up. And so, yeah. Okay.
The built environment is responsible, as mentioned in the opening, for 20% of the country's carbon footprint. That sounds like a lot to me. I have no, where does that come from in the construction process, and how does it compare against other countries?
Yeah, so it is a lot, and it was some of our work that illustrated this, because for a long time the construction and property sector, what was attributed to our sector was just what we used in terms of fossil fuels, but actually what's creating fossil fuels in terms of heating our homes and buildings, but actually we have a far bigger impact than that. So there's two ways we generate carbon emissions. One is through operating and running our homes. We call those operational carbon emissions. That's when you turn on the lights, heat your hot water, run your house or your building. So maybe your heating and ventilation systems, those sorts of systems, lighting, heating, keeping warm and dry. And so when we are generating the electricity for that use, or when we're burning fossil fuels to warm our homes, those are directly creating fossil fuel emissions or carbon emissions. The other way we generate emissions is through the manufacture and installation and transport of building materials. So this is called embodied carbon emissions, and that's the manufacture of materials like concrete, steel, aluminium through the manufacturing and installation and maintenance process. So we call those embodied carbon emissions, and they're about half and half. So about 9 to 10% is embodied carbon emissions, and about the same as operational emissions. I would say that 20% includes infrastructure, so roads, bridges, rail, and that's because they use a lot of material as well, so concrete, steel, aluminium, those sorts of things when they are manufacturing those, building those bridges and roads and things. Yeah, so about 20%. The comparison internationally, I mean, you mentioned a figure closer to 39% for countries overseas, and that's because they often have a grid which has a higher proportion of the energy use in homes and buildings which is generated from gas or coal. So our total emissions for the built environment is more like 20%, and that's because we have a lower carbon grid.
Which is hydro predominantly. But within if it's half and half, so 10% construction or manufacture, and how does that then compare? Yep. I mean, are we efficient in this regard compared with, say, Australia or other comparable countries, or quite different?
Well, we are significantly behind most of the OECD. In fact, the OECD and International Energy Agency have written to our government repeatedly, setting out that our building code is quite low relative to other countries in the OECD and International Energy Agency group. And that's because we have very low insulation levels, very low requirements for keeping heat in our home and running the home at low operational carbon and at healthy standards. So on the operational carbon side, I'd say we're about 20 years behind, though there is plans from government to improve the building code over the next 5 to 10 years. On embodied carbon, most of the world is only just starting to deal with this. So we're similar. Some countries have started to legislate or regulate for it, but really most countries are just coming to terms with that. So we're quite similar to them. We're all significantly behind where we need to be. A potential trajectory is in the region of 40% lower embodied carbon by 2030. That's what the World Green Building Council and a broad coalition that work in construction and embodied carbon have set as a goal. So 40% reduction in embodied carbon by 2030.
And I guess, so there's practices need to be changed, both how we build and how we operate our built environment. How is the industry going? Is it doing it itself, or is it waiting for regulation to come through? And when there are changes, how does it I guess it's similar to farming in a way. How does it, is there a willingness to take it on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what is exciting is we do have some leaders in industry. So the New Zealand Green Building Council, working with the sector, we were created in 2007, 31 organisations as members. We now have 700 organisations from across construction, property, architecture, design, local authorities, listed companies, who are all encouraging this move to lower carbon. And in terms of what they're doing, we now have over 90 buildings this year will be built to the Green Star standard, so lower operational carbon, lower embodied carbon. And we have thousands of homes who are using Homestar to deliver lower operational carbon and starting to reduce that embodied carbon element. So they're leading the pack. But to get the majority of the sector, so that remaining 50 to 70%, we really need regulation. And that's when measures like the Building for Climate Change program and the changes to the H1 section of the building code will drive down those carbon emissions and regulate it and bring the rest of the sector up to where those leaders are moving. So we have some leaders, but we will need regulation to really push things along. And I guess it's really important to note also that we're going to talk a lot about construction and the great work that Burl have done focused on new build homes and buildings. But there is another opportunity, and that's improving the energy efficiency of our existing housing stock in our existing buildings, where there's a huge opportunity to improve that. And indeed, some great work by Professor Michael Jack at Otago University illustrated that improving the energy efficiency of our homes could drastically reduce the peak and reduce the need to turn on Huntly Power Station and reduce the likelihood of blackouts in New Zealand. So there's really big opportunities here to reduce risks, improve resilience for our grid, and reduce running costs and improve health for Aotearoa.
What is the additional cost when you're building a let's say a home to bring it to look like a low emission or a zero emission building, and then how is that valued? Does it get a premium, or does it that such that it's worth it, and as it stands, I guess, today?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really good and complex question. So we have people who are building to significantly better than the building code at the moment. And it's important to note that sometimes when they first start doing that, they can find that challenging, and then that becomes more normalized and the costs reduce over time. So we've seen that in our experience with Homestar and Greenstar. And we have some entities who are building, the listed entities such as Argosy, Stride, Kiwi Property, Precinct, who are building to, say, Greenstar each time with their buildings. And that's because they want to illustrate they've got a healthier, lower carbon building, more quickly get tenants, keep tenants for longer. So it's clearly making sense for them, right, to deliver that, because they're doing that on a voluntary basis. And the same with Homestar. So I would say that in general, you're talking 2 to 3 to 4% uplift for a lower carbon home or building, and higher than that for a near zero carbon home or building. That's a significant step up. But I think what we will see over time is a big change as the sector scales up some of the materials and products that they need to deliver on those homes and buildings. So you'll get learning rates. So to take a product from overseas, solar panels, they've reduced in price by over 70% in the last 15 years, and real ratcheting down as the scale went up. And you'll see some of that come through as we get scale in New Zealand as well. And as the sector learns and understands how to do this better, I think you'll see a reduction in those prices as well. And I think you'll also see subsidies and incentives come through that will help reduce those prices and returns. So to give some examples, Wellington City Council is providing $15,000 per home subsidy for those building to 7 Homestar or above, and $20,000 for 8 Homestar and above in the Wellington region. ANZ is providing a reduced interest rate for those who are building green homes, green certified homes or buildings, of 150 basis points lower interest rate for their business lending, and that's a mainstream offer. And then also there's green finance and green bonds, which also provide lower interest for those building those homes and buildings. And some banks are also providing lower interest mortgage rates. So ANZ, again, they're providing 1% of their mortgage rate for homes that are Homestar rated. So while there's a slight increase in the build costs, there's also these benefits of building better, and builders can, of course, market their homes as lower carbon, lower running costs, and healthier, which may help them in a competitive market.
Fantastic. So just thinking about, larger developers, and you're mentioning sort of on the upper end, 4% being the additional cost. What is that broadly? What are the big ticket items within that uplift?
So some of the items you're seeing is as you get to a higher quality home and building is a better heating and ventilation system. So in homes, you've got mechanical ventilation and heat recovery heating and ventilation system. You've got better windows. You've got better insulation. And you're also getting at the upper end lower embodied carbon concrete being provided for the concrete instead of that. So you get to green concrete options, which can have an uplift in terms of the capital cost. So those are some of those items, and we expect to see some of those come down over time, the uplift in the cost for those. Then I think there is also a little bit more cost in terms of people putting time into the design of that, because you're doing a build which takes more time to consider and draw up. So there's a little bit more analysis needed to reduce the heat loss from the building and design well.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the major sort of things that slowed this project, was actually getting the designs in place for what a low and a near zero emission home would actually look like.
Understood. Okay. So, I mean, obviously at the moment there's been an escalation of costs across the industry. So if you're looking at building a property, I imagine your willingness is sort of what's pushing in one direction, the willingness to take on more costs when cost inflation is already there may be lower. On the other hand, well, what if everything's going up a lot? What's another 4%? So, do you see, because of recent inflation, a push against the willingness to build in a lower carbon way or emissions way, or is it sort of the other way?
So we haven't seen that yet. So if you think about where we're at currently, so 5 years ago we were registering about 500 homes a year for Homestar, our lower carbon, healthier standard for housing. Last year we hit 7,000 homes registered for Homestar. So we've seen a significant rise in uptake and interest. And I think what's helping drive that is entities like Bupa, MetLife Care, Oceania and others. They recognise that there's a really strong driver to deliver lower carbon. And Kāinga Ora is another one, and to deliver against things like the Sustainable Development Goals. So people want healthier, lower carbon homes and buildings. They want to be part of the future. They recognise that the building code is quite a low standard. I mean, we may see more impact on that, in the future, over the next couple of years, but at the moment we're seeing growth. And it's the same with Green Star for buildings. We've seen a growth from 15 to 20 buildings per year to closer to 90 to 100 buildings this year as more people take that up. I would just note one other minor point on costs, and that's we've seen a number of economists comment that when your input costs go up, a number of developers look to reduce the price they pay for land, as opposed to directly putting up the price of the final product, the house. So this has been proven overseas in Europe, but also in New Zealand. So there's some great economists analysis that Auckland Council had done, and also Hamilton City Council, and they found that developers factor in the cost for developing and then that can impact on the price they pay for land, reducing down that land price, as opposed to directly impacting on the total price for the home. I think that and the subsidies we've talked about, we're expecting more banks to come through with lower business loans and lower interest mortgage lending for homes and buildings that are lower carbon. If you think about it, the pension funds of the world are wanting to flow into they need a home for low carbon assets. And there's a global initiative, a net zero carbon banking alliance, that a number of New Zealand banks are signing up to. And there's a massive hockey stick coming, drivers and incentives for lower carbon assets. And so we think that those may help developers and others to continue to push at this agenda despite those inflationary costs.
So, I mean, obviously huge tailwinds for that portion of the industry. Burl and the Green Building Council worked together on a report. And obviously, so Andrew and Nick, you guys know each other well. Would you mind talking about how that came together and what was the driver for it? And then what did you find?
Well, so I'll just talk really briefly because I'm talking too much. But the driver for us is that lots of people, when you talk about green and better homes and buildings, what they talk about immediately is costs. And what we wanted to illustrate is that there's actually some real benefits to doing this to our economy. So, Burl, huge mana in the sector for their great analysis. We talked to them about how we could look at low and zero carbon, near zero carbon homes and buildings and what that might mean for the GDP and benefits for New Zealand. And Nick, over to you for a summary of the report.
Yeah, so the report itself, we looked at houses and sort of smaller, sort of medium-sized commercial offices, which were the ones we were able to get the specs for. We obviously didn't cover the likes of industrial or retail stores. So the combined between the offices and the houses we looked at, we found the sort of GDP increase compared to the building code as it was at that time would lead to 147 billion of additional GDP. That's direct, indirect, and induced. And then creating 1.2 million sort of, we call them full-time equivalent years of employment. So that averages out around 43,000 additional jobs per year over the 28-year period. And then in total, we could save around 8,000 gigawatt hours per year by 2050.
I really don't know what a gigawatt is. I mean, I understand it's a very large amount of energy, but what is that? How do we translate that to what we produce currently, and what does that mean for how many houses? I guess is one way to look at it. Does that equate to?
So I think the way we sort of looked at it initially, I think it was around about 1.2 million. They could take 1.2 million electric vehicles off the road, the equivalent of powering 1.2 million electric vehicles per year from the savings. Okay. So thinking about that shift away from fossil fuels in the transport sector towards electric vehicles, this could cover a large proportion of New Zealand's fleet and therefore reducing some of our need to invest in additional electricity infrastructure.
Okay. So by reducing the amount of electricity we're consuming within houses and smaller businesses, it creates a capacity for use elsewhere, and that will enable us then to drive electric cars, 1.2 million, according to the report. That's a massive finding.
Yeah, it's a massive finding, and this is really, really important because Transpower are talking about us needing to generate 2 to 2.5 times more electricity to get to where we need to. And what everyone tends to talk about is how we need to generate more electricity. So people talk about more solar panels, more hydro, more wind turbines, but actually majority of commentators never mention that we could be ratcheting down the energy we use to free that up for the huge need for electrical vehicles that are coming. So it's a great finding from Nick and the Burl team.
And I think to add to that, at a time of inflation when everyone's worried about costs, it's also you can reduce the electricity that you're using. So, reducing electricity bills, that's money that can be spent, elsewhere in the economy, creating, expenditure elsewhere rather than, just electricity companies.
Yeah. So you mentioned 147 billion in GDP uplift, 43,000 jobs over the period. A large number of gigawatts in energy savings, 8,000 I think was the number. Well, were there any other discoveries through the report and then I understand you also had sort of two scenarios that you unpacked?
Yeah, so we worked on two scenarios. One that would see what we called low emission buildings built from 2025 till 2034, and then from 2035 to 2050 building near zero emission buildings. So this is compared to what would be a Just Code compliant house. So the main difference between those two housing types is using eco concrete as the floor in the low emission house. So that's green concrete, which is being developed by Green Building Council members, and then sort of moving to the near zero emission house. It's replacing the concrete with a suspended timber floor. And so that then reduces those embodied emissions that come through, the manufacturing of concrete and the transport that goes along with it. And then the second scenario we looked at was doing the same, but doing it in 2030 and 2040. And sort of the main sort of finding in terms of the two scenarios was the sooner you do it, the greater the benefits you get, and the longer that those benefits run for. So rather than starting in 2030, you've got those newer, more efficient houses being built sooner. So you get those sort of, even the environmental benefits come sooner, the health benefits come sooner. So it all flows through.
Righto, and so just walk me through where does the GDP come from? Is that we're building new houses to this higher standard, or is it that we're converting existing houses and that there's, I guess like the car fleet moving from one carbon emitting cars to hopefully, Teslas and others. Is it that transition that creates and it's sort of a temporary burst and then we're on a new normal?
So it's partly the way that sort of the economic impact assessment works, and that some would say, you dig a hole, you fill it back in, that has an economic impact. But here we're looking at what would be the addition on top of just building what we currently do. So it's the direct expenditure, so the spending on the building products themselves, the spending on the design, sort of everything that goes into building a house. But then it's also the indirect effects, so the suppliers that are supplying the builders and the designers and the manufacturers, and then the induced impacts as well. So that's the staff, the additional employment that's created, those are additional employees who then go out and spend that additional income, which then flows throughout the economy until it eventually sort of runs out. So that's sort of how that total 147 billion over the 28-year period flows through. So it's around about 5.1 billion per year just on the housing side per annum.
Right. It obviously sounds at a macro level very impressive. Better for the environment, better for employment, and obviously strong for the economy. So why are we not already doing it? What's holding us back?
Oh well, that's a good question. Well, I think pieces of work like this and other advocacy has helped shift the conversation. So. Part of the change was happening as we were commissioning the report. So I can say that government have set out a program of aligning the building code with the Net Zero Carbon Act. And that looks like changing that operational carbon element down to near zero by 2030 to 2035. So really ratcheting down probably in 3 key steps, so that there'll be building code change in 2025, probably around 2028 or so, and then 2032 to get operational carbon emissions ratcheted down significantly and far closer and catch up with most in the OECD. And they're also talking about legislating or to require embodied carbon emissions to be reported and then ratcheted down, probably closer. They haven't set out the targets yet, but would be advocating for in the region of 40% or so by 2030. So I think that there is a challenge in that you have to take an industry with you, have to get builders, engineers, architects on board. There is an appetite for this in our sector. We've got a lot of support from our members, but you know, in New Zealand, we have quite a long tail in the construction sector. We have a lot of homes that are built with by two people and a van. They build 1 to 2 homes a year, and they're going to need some real support to understand and work out what the new materials are needed, how to build in an energy efficient way to stop the air leaking. Some of that is it's going to be a bit harder for them, particularly the second cap change around 27, 28. So we've got to bring that sector with us so that those homes are really good quality homes and delivered well, and so the sector can gear up for this transition.
So obviously a big education piece along the way.
Yeah. And also the other thing that's interesting is, you know, the supply chain, if you've got products, you need to understand and get calculated the embodied carbon impact of your product. You've got to go and have that assessed, because from 2025, MB, the government department that oversees the building code, is saying you'll need to submit how much concrete was used, how much steel was used, is it lower carbon concrete, the type, you know, Nick used in his report, or is it standard concrete? And so there's a big effort from thousands of products out there in the supply chain to gear up with environmental product declarations to confirm in a robust way the carbon impact of manufacturing those products, so that the supply chain's gearing up as well. Usefully, there's free calculators. So we have one for homes on the NZGBC website, the Homestar Embodied Carbon Calculator. Or
rolls off the tongue.
Call it. Yes. What the heck? So builders can use that for free and start assessing. You know, I built a home here out of concrete and a home here out of steel and a home here out of timber. Which one? How am I doing, and how can I ratchet that down through calculating my embodied carbon and get the supply chain ready?
Righto. And I mean, I live in I'm in a personal moment here, but I live in a house that was built in something like 1878. It was a villa in Auckland, and very old, with gaps everywhere. And I think just thinking how you would actually convert that into a green home where I'm not wasting a lot of energy would be quite an undertaking. That would, and I'm sure that applies to probably 500,000 houses in New Zealand at least, something like that. How do you know, homeowners who have existing properties, how should they go about thinking about, you know, making a transition? Is it that you engage with your builder who's gone through the process of exploring what the change looks like, or is it more that it's something you do individually?
Yeah, so there's two potential avenues. One is a significant retrofit, right? Now it is quite a big undertaking for you and your whānau, because the change is going to be a lot of work needed to the house. But that's looking at things like getting the thermal envelope more airtight, get rid of those air gaps, getting good ventilation in. So that product I mentioned before, mechanical ventilation and heat recovery, amazing product because it's taking the warm air out of the house, and as it leaves, it transfers heat to the fresh air that's coming into the house. But to make that effective, you've got to be far more airtight. So if you want to get to really big steps forward, you're talking about quite a big detailed study and quite a big piece of work. There's another potential avenue, and that is to just make small changes. So sometimes people say, well, we're not going to retrofit for 3, 4, 10 years. What can I do now? And there is a free tool called the Home Fit the Home Fit calculator. It's free online, where people can just look online and see, oh, my insulation isn't quite high enough, or my heating system could be more efficient, or here's how I can plug some of the gaps in my home or get a better ventilation system. But that's more if you've got hundreds or $2,000 or $3,000, some steps that you could make now to make the house healthier and warmer and lower carbon. If you're going for that big retrofit big retrofit change, yeah, you need quite a bit of analysis, and that's going to be a bigger play. But if you hit those lower carbon standards like a Homestar, then you could be getting that lower interest mortgage rates and some of those other advantages. And it also means you can sell the house with those credentials, right? So that's useful. And I would just note that ANZ and Westpac are providing quite low interest loans if you're customers of theirs, and ASB have just done the same. So from memory, ANZ will loan up to $80,000 to improve the health and warmth of your house at 1%. Westpac is 0% for up to $40,000, and ASB, I need a reminder actually on their rate and how much they're loaning. But those banks are all looking to try and help their customers improve the health of their homes and lower energy bills, which is great to see. And I really like Nick alluding to this, because we do have a cost of living crisis at the moment, and all these steps are going to reduce costs for people in their homes and reduce those ongoing running costs, which is very positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the report had these big findings. How has it been used since then? Have you, is that something you've been using to advocate against and have evidence in support of it, or is it, or was it published internationally? How did you, I guess, once commissioned, leverage what you've created?
Yeah, so we are using it to support and push for an ambitious Building for Climate Change program. So it's really helpful. First of all, it got some coverage when released, which was great to get that out and get those numbers talked about. It's helping to change the discussion away from, well, we've just got these higher costs and that's going to be a challenge, to look at some of the benefits for our economy as well. So we're going to continue to use that over the next 3 years as we talk to ministers and officials when they're looking at the Building for Climate Change program. And it's really important in changing that conversation and helping to highlight the benefits to our economy, benefits for growth, and the benefits for the grid. I think that's a really key item that, as Nick said, 1.2 million electric vehicles, isn't it far better to save energy rather than trying to generate more and get healthier outcomes?
When you were working through the research piece, Nick, how, what were you surprised by the findings, or was it something that you sort of, as you were going through it, you had a hunch this was coming?
I think from the outset we had a hunch that it was coming. We sort of suspected at the outset that there would be benefits in terms of building lower emission homes. I guess the challenge that I think we foresaw was, how do we encourage people to build these lower emission homes in the face of higher costs? But I think if we look at it as a long-term investment, like most houses are 90 years. I know I live in a house that's much older than 90 years. So you're sort of looking at a long-term investment at a higher cost. But I think in the long run, you've got to think more than just an individual and think at a national level, at a future generation level, who's going to be living in these houses. Those benefits are going to continue a lot longer than just the period that we've looked at. So in a sense, it is good to see that it will deliver a significant economic impact. And I think there's a chance for New Zealand to really become a leader in this if we get out ahead of it. I was at the EDANS conference about a month ago now, and someone mentioned the New Zealand brand is the same value as McDonald's. So why can't New Zealand be a leader in this, zero emission building space? And why can't we become, the world leader and start exporting our knowledge and our products overseas and create, economic impact that way? I'm sitting here in Tokoroa and forests all around me, and I see the logs sitting at ports in New Zealand going overseas. and steel and concrete are significant emitters in terms of the embodied emissions. So if we can transition to using more wood and wood products that come out of New Zealand, developed in New Zealand, there's a real chance for an economic benefit to come out of that and to really boost our economy and our forestry sector.
That was actually my next question, which was, you haven't mentioned innovative timber technologies, and there is a whole sort of, well, it's not new, but growing industry in this space. How do you see that developing? Is that part of the future for us to become a leader? And is it a big component of how we get to the GDP uplift and the energy savings you're referring to?
Did you want to comment first? I mean, I
was just going to say, in terms of the sort of the GDP impact in the report, that sort of comes through the production itself. It's not so much the innovation at the moment. We're sort of, the report's working on what's in place at the moment. I think Andrew mentioned it earlier. You can reduce those costs by, the learning and the economies of scale that come with producing at a higher level. It could be that the economic benefit is potentially less at the back end than we've calculated as you get that improved learning, but that's just a fact of the costs coming down, and then that expenditure will obviously go somewhere else in the economy.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot in the sector who are looking in a lot of detail and doing a lot of work to look at the use of cross-laminated timber and how that can replace concrete and steel in part or all of buildings. And so there's some great examples coming up. There'll be some really exciting projects coming through in New Zealand, in the capital indeed, that very high profile, which will use New Zealand timber to hit 6 Green Star, world leading standards on sustainability. And there's a huge amount going on funded by MPI and others to look at this and drive it for New Zealand. Red Stag, of course, have their new factory they launched just a couple of years ago, which is great to see. Scion is looking at this in detail. And I think we've seen conferences on use of timber for structural elements go from, having 50 or so people along to now having 300-400 people along and really looking at this in detail. And so it's really going to start to hit home over the next 5 years as the embodied carbon calculation becomes required in the building code, because then it all becomes transparent. At the moment, people are interested, they're looking at it, there's some projects that are going ahead, some people, the client doesn't quite want to take that step yet, but from 2025, it will become transparent how high or low embodied carbon your home or building is. And so it really starts to drive change in the sector. And ahead of that, in our tools, Homestar mandates embodied carbon calculations from July next year. So people will need to do what the building code will require 2 years earlier. And in our Green Star tool, it's not just mandation for calculation, there's also minimum thresholds for reducing that embodied carbon as well against average benchmarks in the sector. We're going 10% lower than that. You have to hit that in order to achieve Green Star. So to get those financial incentives and to hit the internationally respected green certification mark, you're going to have to start delivering on embodied carbon, and we're going to see, a lot of interest and drivers in that. I do think there's potential for New Zealand, and I know ministers and others are looking at how they can drive that with the timber that Nick is talking to.
Okay, so there's obviously quite a bit of work going on in that space. So we'll see the innovations, no doubt, coming to market at some point in the future. One of the other things you haven't really mentioned, which comes a bit of a surprise to me, is solar and the potential that has to produce energy for houses and I guess for the grid in total. Is that something you expect that will start taking on more and as part of it, or is it something that's there are other factors pushing away from it? Yeah,
so I think a big focus for the Green Building Council council is that we build healthier, lower carbon homes in terms of the energy that's used in them. So let's start with just making the home more energy efficient and more healthy so that we need less energy, right? So that's a real philosophy on our part, because we know we can do so much better than where we are at the moment with our building code. We do have some clients interested in solar, and that can be helpful. I think that one of the challenges is that on homes, you're generating at a time when the family is out, right? So the kids are at school, often the mum and dad are at work or out, or they just need less energy. So it's not as immediately helpful for that household. Now, there are new technologies where solar panels are joining as a grid to help one another, and that's quite interesting. It could help in future. And I think the other hold up is that in New Zealand, we don't have something like renewable obligation certificates or incentives from central government to drive that up. But fundamentally, our belief is that you can get to far lower energy use through building better and through retrofitting our existing homes. But we are seeing some large-scale solar panels, such as Christchurch Airport is developing those, and so we will see some more of that, I think.
I guess if the grid is mostly hydro, the carbon benefits are lower than they might be in another, jurisdiction. So and it's more of an economic question.
Exactly. Yeah. There's less of a gain because we've already got quite a low grid. You're not. It's more material when you've got fossil fuels generating the grid, because there's a starker difference.
Yeah, when we were developing the specifications, this is something we did speak about, and we sort of excluded the solar panels just given the New Zealand is at 87% renewables at the moment. And so there's not that need like there is in other countries which have a higher proportion of fossil fuels to make that move towards solar. I think increasing demand for electricity, we might see more solar, sort of more houses looking to take on solar. And then, as that technology develops and the ability to store in batteries, I think that might be where we sort of see a bit more residential solar becoming attractive.
Yep, absolutely.
I should have mentioned it just before, but just on another innovation area is concrete and the move to green concrete. You're seeing a number of providers look to use natural pozzolans and move away from potential use of slag and others to decarbonise. And I think that's quite interesting, how you solve the low carbon concrete future as demand goes up. So I think that'll be an area to look at for innovations as well.
Well, and particularly in commercial construction, concrete is just a massive component of it, isn't it? So even small gains there are likely to flow through and meaningful, more broadly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, there's huge potential.
Conscious of time, but if you were sort of stepping back and thinking, okay, well, how do we accelerate this transition? What are you advocating for? What are the big ticket items that you're
we're advocating for? Yeah, so for three key things. One is for the Building for Climate Change program to continue, so that the types of homes and buildings in this report become standard from 2030, right? So in order for the concrete manufacturers to invest in lower carbon concrete, in order for those who are building homes to invest in better systems and processes, structurally insulated panels and mechanical ventilation heat recovery units, they need certainty. So we need to say, we're going to hit that almost zero operational carbon in the early 2030s. And that's what we're committed to. That's government. And then secondly, we need government to continue to lead by building ahead of the building code, so the sector learns and gains knowledge from leading before the building code changes. And then thirdly, in order to drive change in existing buildings, we need energy labels on our buildings, so office buildings, retail, warehouses, so that people can tell which ones are energy efficient or not. And that drives massive change. And we need energy performance certificates on our homes, so that, Stefan, when someone comes to buy your house, they say, oh, that's a G-rated house, quite a few drafts
Z-rated,
there.
I'd expect.
They come to Nick's house, Z-rated. They come to Nick's house, which I'm sure is going to be an A or B-rated house, and they say, oh, well, this is going to be better for our whānau and that type of thing. I do think the thing that's going to help drive all that change is for the banks to continue to come forward. And some banks have made steps, but I would say that other banks need to step up. If they want to be part of the low carbon future, they need to offer 100, 150 basis points off business lending for homes and buildings that are green and lower carbon. And they really need to offer lower interest mortgage rates, because then a builder will say, yeah, I'm going to spend an extra 10 or 15K more, build this, because I'm going to be able to offer my clients a lower interest mortgage rate. Now that's really effective and will drive a lot of change.
I think part of it's also public awareness. I wasn't aware of the emissions from the built environment until I started doing this report. I wasn't aware that the benefits of building my house to a lower emission standard and what that would do to the energy costs and the health benefits for my whānau. So I think it's just, and Andrew mentioned the sort of energy performance certificates. I think that's really going to help people understand, that you can get better performance out of our houses. There's no point sitting there complaining about, oh, my house is cold, my electricity bill's too high. There are things we can do to improve our quality of living in our houses.
The only other thing I'd say is that we're looking forward to the Commerce Commission investigation of residential material supply, because clearly there's an issue with the cost of our materials and building homes in New Zealand. And the more competitive we can be with our materials, the more we can bring down the total price of building the home, and that will help as well.
Absolutely. And the willingness to, I guess, spend a little bit extra to get the gains, will present themselves more. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Andrew. It's been a really enjoyable conversation and enlightening. I've certainly learned a lot. It's been great to speak with you, and I wish you best for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, New Zealand Funds. All the best. Ka kite.
Thank you.
This has been The Monday Call, brought to you by NZ Funds. New Zealand Funds Management Limited is the issuer of the NZ Funds KiwiSaver scheme, the NZ Funds Managed Superannuation Service, the NZ Funds Advised Portfolio Service, the NZ Funds Wealth Builder, and NZ Funds Income Generator. A product disclosure statement for each is available at nzfunds.co.nz. Past performance is not necessarily an indicator of future returns.